Hello travelers, it's been a long day for you already. You can now rest here, listen to funny histories to drift off to sleep. Tonight we will dive into the topic Your Life as Napoleon de Buonaparte and many more. Let's begin. Congratulations. You've just been born on a small island in the Mediterranean. The year is 1769. The town is Ajaccio. And you are, brace yourself for this, Napoleon de Buonaparte, which sounds less like the name of a future emperor and more like a wine with too much confidence. You're French now, kind of. Corsica had just been purchased by France, which means you're technically French, but in the way someone who shows up late to a party is technically still invited. You're the second of 8 children. Your family is minor nobility, which means you get to say we're nobility while still sharing a room with 3 siblings and a goat. Your father pulls strings to send you to military school in mainland France. And let me tell you, nothing prepares you for leadership quite like being the short, Italian-accented new kid at a snobby French academy. You're mocked for your height, your accent, and the fact that you read too much. Basically, you're a walking Napoleon complex in development. But here's the twist. You're brilliant. You devour books on strategy and warfare like they're dessert. And unlike most teenage boys, you're more interested in Julius Caesar than in whatever counts as TikTok in the 18th century. Probably staring intensely at a musket. By the time you're a teenager, you already speak like a future general. You call the revolution in Corsica the cause of the people, which is inspiring, until you realize the people don't particularly want you. You get kicked out of the Corsican independence movement and go all in on Team France instead. Cue the French Revolution. Now most people run from revolutions. You see one and say, finally my time to shine. The monarchy's collapsing, heads are rolling, literally, and the country is screaming for leadership. You, a 24-year-old artillery officer with a burning ambition and a taste for drama, step in and say, I'll do it. Before we continue on, leave a comment down below to let me know where you are from and what time you are listening to this. Also leave a like and subscribe to the channel, but only if you enjoy what I do here. Napoleon's early revolutionary years are full of chaos, ambition, and accidental promotions. You're young, you're ambitious, and you're in the middle of revolutionary France, a place where job openings often come up because the previous guy lost his head. Literally, and lucky you, you're good at cannons. Like really good. You're not just aiming them, you're choreographing them like a ballet of destruction. In 1793, you get your big break at the siege of Toulon. The British are holding the port city, and the French generals are, how should we put this, impressively mediocre. You, on the other hand, look at the battlefield and say this could use more me. You draft a plan that actually works. The British are booted out, and you're promoted to brigadier general at the age of 24, which is wild, because most 24-year-olds are still figuring out laundry. The victory at Toulon puts you on the map. You're no longer just Napoleon the nerdy artillery guy with a chip on his shoulder. You're now Napoleon the slightly terrifying military genius with a chip on everyone else's shoulder too. But just as things are heating up for you, Robespierre falls from power, by which we mean he falls into a guillotine. And because you were kind of associated with his faction, suddenly you're not brilliant young officer, you're suspicious political liability. 1 minute you're a national hero, the next you're unemployed with a very strong chance of becoming a head shorter. Still, you manage to dodge the chopping block by laying low and pretending to be normal, which is hard for someone who dreams in military formations. Then comes 1795 and Paris is having one of its signature "we hate everything" uprisings. Royalists are trying to overthrow the new government. The leaders of the Directory look around for someone to save them and go, what about that short guy with all the cannons? Boom, you're back. You suppress the Royalist uprising in Paris with what historians gently refer to as a whiff of grape shot. What that really means is you use artillery to absolutely obliterate the mob in the streets. No speeches, no debates. Just you, a big gun, and a promotion. The revolution officially knows your name, and it sounds like victory with an accent. You're rewarded with command of the army of Italy, which sounds nice until you realize the army is half-starved, half-paid, and half-interested in listening to you. But don't worry, you turn them into a winning machine using charm, strategy, and the promise of looting, because nothing motivates the troops quite like the chance to steal expensive drapes from northern Italy. Let's march into Italy, where your life as Napoleon starts to feel less like a military assignment and more like an aggressively confident tour of European domination. You arrive in Italy in 1796 with an army that's cold, hungry, and only slightly more organized than a food fight. Morale is so low that if you'd given your men the option to desert or be hugged by a porcupine, they'd probably ask how sharp the porcupine was. But then you show up 20-something, 5 foot something, and radiating pure tactical arrogance. You tell them, soldiers, you are poorly fed and nearly naked, but victory will give you everything, which is a bold move, considering they were mostly expecting soup. And somehow it works. You electrify them. The Italian campaign begins, and you turn your underfed rabble into an unstoppable avalanche. You take on the Austrians, the Sardinians, the Piedmontese, basically anyone who has a border and an attitude, and you crush them. You don't just win battles, you outthink, outflank, and outdramatize your opponents. You move faster than anyone expects, split armies like you're slicing baguettes, and appear where generals swear you physically couldn't be. You're basically playing chess while everyone else is trying to remember how checkers works. You become a legend almost overnight. In France, newspapers can't print your name fast enough. Portraits of you begin circulating where you look suspiciously taller and significantly more glowy than in real life. You're being mythologized before you even hit your 30s. It's like fan fiction, but with bayonets. Now about your relationship with loot. You're not shy. Your army starts collecting souvenirs from Italy, painting sculptures, gold, entire wagons full of Renaissance art. You tell yourself it's for the glory of France. The Italians tell themselves you're a very well-dressed burglar. Politically, you start making moves that scream, maybe I don't just want to win battles. Maybe I want to run the whole show. You redraw borders, create client states, and basically tell Italy, congratulations, you're French now, or at least French adjacent. Back home, the government is nervous. You're too popular, too powerful, too successful. You're the guy they send to win wars, not the guy they want coming back and realizing he could probably also run the country. So naturally, they promote you again and ship you off somewhere you can't cause too much trouble. Enter Egypt, because when someone is becoming a little too famous in Europe, the obvious solution is to send them to the desert with some camels and a dream. Welcome to Egypt, where your military genius meets sand, sunstroke, and a slightly catastrophic misunderstanding of geography. And yet, somehow it only adds to your legend. It's 1798. You tell the French government you're going to Egypt to strike a blow against the British Empire, which sounds noble until you realize strike a blow roughly translates to get very sweaty, lose a navy, and maybe find a pyramid. Why Egypt? Because it's far enough from Paris that you can't accidentally stage a coup, but exotic enough to keep your ego entertained. Plus, you say you're there to liberate the Egyptians, which is a generous interpretation of show up with 38,000 soldiers and demand sandwiches. You land in Alexandria and immediately begin doing what you do best, marching fast, surprising people, and rewriting history with your face on it. You take Cairo after defeating the Mamluks at the Battle of the Pyramids, an event that sounds way more glamorous than it was. You did not, in fact, fight on the pyramids. The battle was 15 miles away, but the Battle of the Flat Field near Giza doesn't quite sell posters. But the real surprise comes from your side quest, science. You bring with you a team of 160 scholars, engineers, artists, and nerds. While you're busy fighting, they're busy cataloging everything they can find. They sketch temples, translate hieroglyphs, and stumble across something called the Rosetta Stone. Yes, that Rosetta Stone. So technically, while you failed to conquer Egypt, you do help us eventually learn to read ancient Egyptian, not a bad consolation prize. Unfortunately, not everything's coming up. Bonaparte. The British Navy under Admiral Nelson shows up and absolutely obliterates your fleet at the Battle of the Nile. Your ships explode so dramatically, you could sell tickets if there were anyone left to collect them. Suddenly, you're a military genius, stranded. Egypt turns from a conquest into an awkward vacation. You try to build alliances, rewrite laws, and even take part in duels with mosquitoes the size of pigeons. But slowly, painfully, the whole thing unravels like a badly folded map. Meanwhile, back in France, things are going terribly. The government is unpopular. Europe is still at war. And people are wondering if maybe, just maybe, the guy who once conquered half of Italy and stole several cathedrals worth of loot might make a decent leader. So what do? You abandon your army. Yes, truly. One night in 1799, you just rave. You sneak back to France, probably telling your officers something like, "Hold my horse, I'll be right back," and then vanish over the horizon like a very confident desert mirage. And when you arrive in France, you find exactly what you need. Chaos, discontent, and a power vacuum just begging for someone dramatic to walk into the room and take charge. You're about to trade in your general's hat for a much fancier title. Not king, not emperor, not yet. First, something a little more subtle, like first consul of the Republic. Totally democratic. Promise. Let's talk about the part where you decide being the most famous general in Europe just isn't enough, and you stage a political takeover so dramatic, it practically needs its own soundtrack. It's 1799. France is a mess again. The Directory, which sounds like an official-sounding government, is really just a bunch of guys arguing in wigs. The economy is tanking, the military's restless, and everyone is playing musical chairs with power, except no one remembers where the music is coming from. Enter you. Napoleon Bonaparte, freshly returned from Egypt, glowing with charisma, and absolutely not explaining why you left thousands of troops behind. Doesn't matter. You walk back into Paris like a man who never lost a war, with newspapers already calling you France's savior, which, in French political terms, means slightly less awful than the last guy. So what do? You stage a coup, and not just any coup. This one's got style. It's called the Coup of 18 Brumaire, because the French revolutionary calendar insisted on making everything sound like a scented candle. It's basically November 9th, but don't let that ruin the mystery. You start by convincing some politicians that the government is in danger, spoiler, it's not, and that they should all flee to the suburbs for safety, because nothing says stability like panicked lawmakers in a panic room. Then, with your brother Lucien helping inside the legislature and you outside with armed soldiers, you give what might be the most awkward political speech in history. You barge into the chambers, demand order, and try to sell your vision of a new government. Instead of applause, you get heckled. Someone shouts, "Down with the dictator." Someone else might have thrown a chair. You nearly panic. The plan is falling apart. The coup is teetering on the edge of becoming a meme. So you pivot. You send in troops, not for a speech, not for negotiation, just to walk in and say, "Gentlemen, it's time to leave, now." Nothing quite clears a room like bayonets. And just like that, the Directory is dissolved. The old government is gone. You and two others, because democracy still needs props, become the new ruling triumvirate. But let's be honest, it's mostly you. The other two are just there to hold the Constitution still while you rewrite it. Congratulations, you're now first consul of France. It's like being president. If the president had 0 term limits, wrote the laws himself, and didn't really believe in sharing power. But here's the twist. You keep up appearances. You talk about liberty. You use phrases like the will of the people. You have votes, rigged ones. Sure, But people feel like they're choosing you. You're not a tyrant, you're a man of destiny, wearing a military uniform in every portrait. From here, you'll rebuild the economy, reform education, stabilize the banks, and reorganize the entire legal system into what becomes the Napoleonic Code. That's right, you don't just want to rule France, you want to organize it, alphabetize it, and make it march in a straight line. But even all that success doesn't scratch the itch. Because you don't just want to lead France, you want to crown yourself emperor. Let's head to the moment where subtlety leaves the building entirely, and you decide that if history's going to crown you, it might as well be in front of 1,000 dignitaries, a full orchestra, and one very confused pope. It's 1804, and things are going disturbingly well. You've transformed France from chaotic revolution into a humming machine of law, order, and government-issued efficiency. The people adore you, or at least they adore the idea of a strong leader who isn't actively beheading everyone. You've won wars, rewritten laws, and even made peace with the Catholic Church. Yes, the Catholic Church, you short, sharp, secular Napoleon told the Pope. Let's be friends. And he agreed, sort of. But here's the thing, you're done pretending to share power. This whole first consul act has gotten old, and France needs something more imperial, regal, dramatic. France needs an emperor. Coincidentally, you know just the man, and so you announce that you'll be crowned emperor of the French. Not king emperor, because kings are born into power, emperors take it. Now, in theory, you should be crowned by the Pope as tradition dictates. That's what makes it official. God's representative on earth placing the crown on your humble anointed head. It's supposed to be symbolic, spiritual, a moment of divine recognition. You, however, are not a fan of waiting for anyone else to finish a sentence, much less complete a symbolic gesture. So when the big day arrives, December 2nd, 1804, you walk into Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris, wearing enough gold embroidery to make a chandelier feel underdressed. The church is packed, the Pope is seated, the choir is booming, and everyone's waiting for the sacred moment. Then you take the crown from the Pope's hands and place it on your own head. Because if anyone's going to say you're chosen by fate, it's going to be you. And if anyone's going to do the dramatic crown-lifting slow-motion gesture, again, it's you. The Pope, to his credit, doesn't throw the holy water in your face. He just sighs deeply, perhaps for Europe as a whole. Your wife, Josephine, kneels next. She gets a crown too, though slightly smaller, because marriage is about compromise. The ceremony isn't just pageantry, it's propaganda. You've declared to France, to Europe, and to history that you didn't inherit this power. You earned it. You took a country on the brink of collapse and made it stand tall. You gave it laws, stability, and matching uniforms. And now it's giving you an empire in return. But of course, with an empire comes expectations. You're no longer just defending France. Now you have to expand it, nurture it, mold it, possibly break it, and rebuild it. And for that, you'll need more wars, more victories, more Europe, because an emperor without a battlefield is just a very fancy man with a hat. Were the Napoleonic Wars your imperial world tour? If your rise to power was a dramatic overture, this is the main symphony, and it's played entirely with cannons. You're crowned emperor, and suddenly all of Europe's monarchs begin sweating into their royal bathrobes, because nothing scares old bloodlines quite like a short man with new ideas and a disturbingly successful military track record. They've seen revolutions before, but never one that evolved into an empire faster than you can say territorial annexation. So the coalitions begin. Britain, Austria, Russia, Prussia, basically everyone with a uniform and a grudge, start teaming up in shifting islands called coalitions, which is really just a fancy way of saying, we still don't know how to stop this guy. Your response? You turn France into a military factory. Every man is a soldier. Every road leads to a battlefield, and every battlefield leads to another surrender. You're not just fighting wars, you're conducting them, with movements so precise and strategy so elegant that your enemies keep wondering if they accidentally joined a stage play written by a very angry chess master. Let's talk battles. Austerlitz, 1805. Your masterpiece. 3 emperors on one battlefield. You, the Austrian emperor, and the Russian Tsar. You lure them into attacking your weak right flank, then snap the trap shut and annihilate them. It's so brilliant it makes military historians swoon centuries later. You lose fewer than 10,000 men, they lose over 30,000. You celebrate by redrawing Central Europe like it's a group project and you're the only one who brought a pen. Jene and Aousted, 1806. The Prussians finally step in, thinking they can stop you with tradition and tall hats. You defeat them both at the same time on the same day. The Prussian army formerly feared gets folded like a badly pitched tent. Friedland, 1807. You take on Russia again, win big, and meet Tsar Alexander afterward on a raft in the middle of a river. You charm him so hard he basically agrees to be your political pen pal. But it's not just about battles. You spread the Napoleonic code everywhere you go, abolishing feudalism, instituting legal reforms, introducing secular education. To some, you're a conqueror. To others, you're enlightenment on horseback. But not everyone's thrilled, especially Britain. The British Royal Navy controls the seas, and you control everything else. You can't invade them. Your navy was kind of exploded by Admiral Nelson at Trafalgar in 1805, but you can make their lives annoying. So you impose the continental system, a massive economic blockade against British goods. You tell all of Europe, no more British imports. If you buy tea from London, I will personally show up at your border and scowl. Spoiler, it doesn't work. Smugglers smuggle, economies suffer. And the only thing more frustrating than British goods is the lack of British goods. You also start putting your family members on thrones like you're assembling a royal IKEA set. Your brother Joseph becomes king of Spain. Your brother Louis becomes king of Holland. Your brother-in-law gets Naples. Even your stepson gets Italy. France becomes less of a country and more of a franchise. But it's in Spain where things go sideways. You invade in 1808 thinking it'll be easy, some marching, some cannon fire, some polite surrendering. Instead, you find guerrilla warfare, stubborn resistance, and a British army led by a man named Wellington. You start bleeding men faster than you can replace them, and suddenly the war machine starts making strange noises, and then you make a fatal decision. You look east, at Russia, vast, cold, distant Russia, and you think, I could probably take that. So here's the situation. Russia has backed out of your continental system. They're trading with Britain again, which is like texting your ex right after swearing you were done. You're not angry, you're just going to mobilize the largest army Europe has ever seen and march straight to Moscow. You know, normal consequences. Your Grande Armée isn't just French. It's a mix of Italians, Germans, Poles, Austrians. You've basically assembled the Eurozone 2,000 years early. But with worse winter coats, you set off in June, confident that you'll conquer Russia the same way you conquered everyone else. Quickly, brilliantly, and with just the right amount of dramatic flair. Spoiler, it doesn't go that way. First problem, Russia refuses to fight you directly. They just keep retreating. Every time you think you've caught them, they vanish deeper into the countryside like Slavic ninjas, burning everything behind them. This is called scorched earth. You call it deeply inconvenient. Your soldiers call it wait. Where's dinner? By the time you finally get a battle, it's Borodino, September 1812. It's one of the bloodiest one-day battles in history. You technically win, but it's like winning a fistfight by falling on top of the other guy. You're both a mess and no one's walking away proud. Still, the road to Moscow is open. So you march in and find the city empty. Not just of people, of supplies, food, furniture, anything useful, and then it gets worse. Moscow catches fire. It's not clear who started it. Could be Russian sabotage, could be accidents, but the city becomes a smoldering ruin. Congratulations, you've conquered a pile of ash. Now you wait. You think Tsar Alexander will come crawling to negotiate peace. He does not. He just stares at you from St. Petersburg, like a man watching his cat knock over wine glasses, mildly annoyed, but absolutely not stopping it. So you do the unthinkable. You retreat, and winter hits. You didn't plan for winter because, let's be honest, you thought you'd be home by then. But now it's snowing, temperatures drop below 30 degrees. Horses die, men freeze in their boots, bread turns to ice. Your mighty army begins collapsing, starving, freezing, ambushed by Cossacks, and harassed by Russian troops who've decided now is a great time to be aggressive. You started with over 600,000 troops, fewer than 100,000 make it out. And you race back to Paris ahead of the army, because emperors can't exactly hitchhike. You've got to prepare the narrative. No, it wasn't a disaster, it was a strategic winter appreciation tour. Europe, meanwhile, smells blood. The Sixth Coalition rises. Britain, Russia, Prussia, Austria, Sweden, and basically every nation you've ever side-eyed. They're coming, and this time you're on the defensive. It's 1813, and you're back in Paris, trying to explain to your government that the Russian winter is not in fact a sentient military commander, but it might as well be. Your army is gutted. Your allies are nervous. Your enemies absolutely thriving. The Sixth Coalition smells your blood in the snow, and now they're coming at you from all directions like Europe's angriest group chat. You still fight, of course. You always, but this time, you're playing defense, trying to hold together a crumbling empire with duct tape, determination, and a frankly irresponsible level of caffeine. You rebuild an army out of conscripts, boys barely old enough to shave, and veterans so tired they might just surrender to the nearest bakery. You win a few small victories because you're still Napoleon, and genius doesn't evaporate overnight. But the walls are closing in, and then comes Leipzig, October 1813, also known as the Battle of the Nations, because everyone shows up. Seriously, this is the historical equivalent of the season finale, when all the side characters return for revenge. Over 600,000 troops clash. You're outnumbered, outgunned, and by the end out of options. You lose badly. You retreat, leaving behind cannons, wounded men, and a rapidly diminishing aura of invincibility. France itself is now threatened. Your enemies invade, and by early 1814, they're marching through your countryside like they own the place. Parisians, once cheering your name, now eye the exit doors nervously. You fight valiantly in the 6 days campaign, some of your finest tactical work, but it's too late. The coalition enters Paris in March. You abdicate in April. It's done. Just like that, you're no longer Napoleon the Emperor. You're Napoleon, though unemployed, and the Allies, in what might be the politest insult in history, give you a consolation prize, the island of Elba. Tiny, quiet, technically yours to rule. Yes, but about as far from the glory of empire as a man can fall without being handed a mop. So you go to Elba, where you pace and think and plan, because you're Napoleon. You didn't come this far just to die of boredom in a Mediterranean tax haven. And then, less than a year later, you leave. With a handful of loyal men, you sail back to France. The Bourbon king sends troops to stop you. They meet you on the road. You walk up to them, throw open your coat, and shout, "If any of you would shoot your emperor, do it now." They do not. Instead, they cheer, and just like that, you're back. The 100 days begin. You raise an army. You take Paris. You reignite old fears. Europe panics again, and once more they unite against you. Which brings us to Waterloo, June 18, 1815. Waterloo, where the drama reaches peak levels, and not even a Napoleon-sized ego can rewrite the script. This is where everything comes crashing down, and Europe collectively breathes a sigh of relief, probably while ordering a few celebratory pints. So here we are. It's June 1815, and you've done the unthinkable. You've marched back into France, taken Paris without much more than a raised eyebrow and a couple of stirring speeches, and now you're gearing up for the big one, the ultimate comeback tour. Because if there's one thing Napoleon does well, it's comeback tours. Forget the Battle of Nations. You've got fresh new fans, a polished image, and a whole new army that's maybe a little less seasoned, but still enthusiastically loyal, or at least scared of what will happen if they're not. But not everyone's thrilled by this resurgence. The coalition powers, Britain, Prussia, Austria, Russia, they're all like, yes, here we go again, the man who refuses to stay defeated. They're not interested in negotiations. This time it's all-out war. No more half measures, no more nice little treaties. They're ready to rid Europe of your short strategic genius once and for all. And so they converge on Belgium. You can practically hear the faint sound of jingling sabers and perhaps a few snickers in the distance. Your enemies have learned their lesson. This time you're not getting the easy victory. You rally your troops. You've got the numbers, around 73,000 men against the British-led forces and 68,000 Prussians coming in from the side. You've got the experience. You've got the strategy. The problem? The weather. It's a swamp, a glorious, muddy mess where no one's quite sure if they're fighting the enemy or their own boots. But that's the thing about Napoleon. You're going to fight anyway. If you could turn a battlefield into a precision machine, you would. But on June 18, it's as if fate has decided. This is going to be one chaotic battle. You'll need every ounce of your battlefield brilliance to make it work. As the battle starts, your forces are facing off against the Duke of Wellington's British army, about 68,000 men on the ridge of Waterloo. You strike first, pushing forward with everything you've got, commanding waves of infantry and cavalry to charge, artillery blasting with such enthusiasm that even the ground looks like it's trying to run away. You've got the momentum, and for a while it seems like you're going to push Wellington back. But the man's a tough nut to crack, and he's holding steady. Worse still, Prussians are coming, led by the ever-stubborn Gebhard Leberecht von Blücher, a name so German it could be used as a weapon in itself. You don't want to fight the Prussians, but you know they're coming. Like an uninvited guest who's definitely bringing potato salad, you send your cavalry charging, with all the ferocity of a man who's already lost one empire and absolutely refuses to lose another. But the Prussians, with the timing of a well-rehearsed Broadway show, arrive just in time to cause chaos. They're too much, too fast, and they're on your flank, hitting you at the worst possible moment. The battlefield devolves into absolute chaos. Mud, smoke, gunfire, and soldiers charging into confusion. This isn't the disciplined genius of the previous campaigns. This is a brutal, sludgy fight where everything seems to be happening all at once, like a very intense, very messy game of tug-of-war between fate and stubbornness. By the end of the day, Wellington stands victorious, and Blücher's Prussians are happily patting themselves on the back for joining in. You, on the other hand, are faced with the grim reality that the last great battle of your career ended with you being decisively beaten. But you're not one for dramatic exits, are you? You retreat to Paris. Again, because that's where all the best dramatic speeches happen. You make a last-ditch attempt to save your empire. But it's over. Your generals are shaking their heads. Your advisors are probably wondering if they should have just stayed in bed that morning. You can't stop the tide of defeat this time. You abdicate once more, and this time you're not getting an island vacation. You're getting St. Helena, a much less glamorous locale, an island so remote it might as well have been on the moon. And so, in the most anticlimactic of ends, you're shipped off and Europe breathes a sigh of relief. They've been waiting for the grand Napoleon exit, but all they get is the sound of a fading ship's horn. But don't think it's all over. Napoleon on St. Helena becomes the stuff of legend. He's a prisoner of his own fate, yes, but also the greatest military mind the world has seen in centuries. He dies in 1821, possibly from stomach cancer, possibly from the crushing weight of it all. But either way, his legacy is far from finished. You've won wars, built empires, and changed the world. Just maybe you shouldn't have marched into Russia in the dead of winter. And there you have it, your life, Napoleon. A saga of glory, strategy, dramatic speeches, tragic defeats, and let's face it, a lot of unfortunate weather patterns. From a young artillery officer to Emperor of the French and finally to exile on a lonely island, your name will echo through the halls of history, not just as a conqueror, but as a reminder that sometimes, no matter how smart you are, the universe can still trip you up with a little bit of cold and a few 100,000 enemies. In the end, though, one thing's for sure, you'll never be forgotten. After all, who else could turn every battlefield into a stage, every campaign into a drama, and every retreat into something that looked like it could have been a well-planned military tactic? Only Napoleon. Let's dive into what life as a medieval knight really looks like. Not the glorified tales, but the day-to-day grind of trying to live up to an ancient code that quite frankly feels like more work than it's worth sometimes. So you've decided to become a knight. The first step, being a page, not quite a knight, but not quite a squire either. This is where you get your first taste of what it's like to be a servant to a noble. You're basically a glorified servant with dreams of grandeur. Your days are filled with running errands, shining armor that's not even yours, and learning how to be a decent person, at least in theory. But the good news is you're learning from the best, your future knight mentors, who'll teach you how to be gallant, brave. Well, mostly make sure you don't fall asleep in the middle of the Lord's speech about the importance of his family crest. At this stage, you're spending most of your time trying to stay out of the way of the real knights, who are probably busy practicing their jousting and trying not to knock each other out, because let's be honest, they're not the best at this. But this is also when you start getting your first real lessons. It's not just about holding a sword, though that's coming. It's about learning the art of standing perfectly still while someone talks about their family history, their sword collection, and how they once might have fought in a battle, but they can't quite remember. You nod thoughtfully and pretend to care. Let's jump into the moment where you officially become a squire and step up into the realm of actual knight training. The part where things get serious, or at least as serious as anything can get when you're wearing armor that weighs more than your entire body. So congratulations, you've made it. You've survived the endless chores and awkward feasts, and now you're no longer a page. You've been promoted to squire, a title that sounds a lot cooler than it actually is. Sure, you get to carry around a sword, even if it's just for show at this point, but you're still expected to do a lot of grunt work. Your main job? To be the personal assistant of an actual knight. You're basically their walking, talking, sword-carrying helper. This is where the real training begins. Forget the weird stuff you learned as a page about holding doors. Now you're actually learning how to fight and wear armor, which, let's be real, is mostly just practicing not to die. But before we dive into that, there's a small but important task that all knights face when becoming a squire: the armor fitting. Picture it. You're standing in front of a blacksmith who looks like he's built from stone and sweat. and he's about to fit you into a suit of armor that could double as a portable prison. You're handed a helmet that weighs more than your head, shoulder plates that rub against your neck, and boots that are probably made of iron, because why not make every part of your life as uncomfortable as possible? But this is the dream, right? You're supposed to look fierce and indestructible, but the reality, you can barely move without sounding like a malfunctioning trash can. As you're trying to maneuver in your new armor, you'll quickly realize two things. One, flexibility, gone. You'll have the agility of a rock. Two, breathing, maybe not so much. You're suffocating under 50 pounds of metal that keeps creaking every time you bend your knees. You'll spend the next few days trying to get used to this ridiculous suit that makes even standing an Olympic sport. But hey, this is what you signed up for, right? And the training has just begun. Now that you're all armored up and possibly having an existential crisis about why you thought this was a good idea, it's time to start real knight training. It's all about learning how to wield a sword, ride a horse, and most importantly, not die when you're thrown into actual combat. You've got a mentor now, a grizzled old knight with a taste for dramatic speeches and a love of heavy weaponry. The first lesson, sword fighting. You thought holding a sword was tough when you were a page. Now you're expected to actually swing it really hard and not accidentally cut off your own foot in the process. At first you'll be awkward. Imagine trying to use a broom as a sword while someone watches with their arms crossed, judging every move you make. It's not pretty. The good news, you'll get really good at swinging a sword in the air, even if there's no actual opponent to fight. But then, when it's time to spar with another squire, you'll quickly learn that swords are heavy, and the guy across from you is probably way better at this than you. You'll end up looking like an angry toddler with a stick. Then there's horsemanship. Yes, you finally get to ride your noble steed. That is, until you realize your horse is about as cooperative as a toddler who's been told it's bedtime. Your horse doesn't want to be in the training yard. It would much rather be grazing or chasing after other horses. You're not riding into battle yet. You're just trying to make sure you don't fall off when the horse decides to take a detour through the bushes. This is, of course, the same horse that's going to be your lifeline in battle, so let's hope it eventually gets its act together. So here you are, standing on the edge of the battlefield, trying to act calm, cool, and collected. You're a squire now, a fighting machine in training, until you see the real knights charging into battle, looking like they actually know what they're doing. You're the new kid, the one everyone's going to watch to see if you totally flop or somehow manage to survive without embarrassing yourself too much. Spoiler, it's gonna be mostly embarrassing. The first thing you realize is that you have no idea what you're supposed to do. You're standing there holding your sword, and then you hear the battle horn. Time to fight. But wait, no one told you about this part. You've only sparred with other squires up to this point, where the goal was more about looking cool than actually hitting someone. Now, you're facing off with actual knights who've been training for years. These knights look like they've been born with swords in their hands. Meanwhile, you're just trying to remember which way your sword is supposed to go and praying that your armor doesn't fall apart mid-swing. Then it hits you. The real danger isn't even the people you're fighting. It's the other squires and knights charging around you. The chaos is overwhelming. There are knights galloping toward you at full speed, swords raised, and you're trying to avoid being trampled. You're dodging and weaving, trying not to get hit by a horse's hoof or a sword that looks like it's meant to cleave you in half. You swear your heart rate has never been higher in your entire life. You've practiced a lot of things, sword swings, footwork, holding your ground, but nothing prepares you for the sheer mayhem of a real fight. It's like someone let loose a horde of angry bees, and you're stuck in the middle of it, praying you don't get stung. At some point, you're not even sure who's on your side anymore. Everyone looks the same in their armor, and there's no friendly wave before someone charges at you with their sword raised. Your first encounter, probably not gonna go well. You're likely to swing and miss. Or worse, you'll swing too hard and end up losing your balance and face-planting straight into the mud. Not a good look. But don't worry, that's normal. You'll get better at this. Maybe. Your goal in the first real fight. Simply don't die, and maybe, just maybe, make it out with your dignity and your legs intact. But there's always the fear that your noble peers are watching. The ones who've been knights for decades, who've faced off against real enemies. As a squire, you're the rookie, the one they're expecting to fail in the most spectacular way possible. And you're just hoping you don't become the joke of the day. You can already hear their whispers. Did you see young Squire Gerald get knocked down by a 12-year-old stick? You're just praying it's not you. But of course, it will be you, and it'll be embarrassing. But hey, at least you're alive, right? And when the fight's over, well, no one's gonna tell you that you did a good job, but at least you didn't get trampled. You've survived the first battle as a squire, and that's something, the real lesson. It's not about winning, it's about not getting killed while trying to look heroic. Alright, let's move from the chaotic battlefield to the glory and terror of the tournament. You've survived your first fight, but now it's time for the spectacle, jousting. You know, the sport that looks impressive from a distance, but up close, it's a terrifying game of who can stay on their horse while someone tries to knock them into another dimension with a long pointy stick. Jousting. The medieval version of a NASCAR race, only with less speed and a lot more potentially deadly weapons. It's a big deal. The tournament's all about knights showing off their strength, skill, and courage. And for some reason, you found yourself volunteering, maybe against your better judgment, to participate in it. The crowd's there, they're all cheering, and you're about to try not to get impaled by a giant lance. But before we even talk about riding in the tournament, let's talk about the horse. Your noble steed is supposed to be your partner in this death-defying sport, but you're not exactly on the same page. First off, it's not like your horse is some perfectly trained war hero. It's more like a teenager who's been given way too many energy drinks and now thinks it can do whatever it wants. You're supposed to ride into battle together, but half the time you're just praying the horse will stay on the path and not run off toward the snack stand. Now add to this the armor. Remember how earlier we talked about how you could barely move in your suit? Well, now you're supposed to charge at another knight full speed with that suit of armor. You've got the lance in one hand, probably trembling, and your other hand is desperately holding the reins, trying not to fall off while looking like you've actually got this under control. You've seen jousting before, of course. You've heard the stories. It's supposed to be an elegant display of skill and honor. What they don't tell you, you're going to spend the next few seconds looking like a human cannonball rocketing toward an opponent who looks way more confident than you. You and the other knight are on your horses, charging at each other like two enormous wrecking balls, and then with a mighty crash, the lances connect. And here's the kicker. If you do it wrong, or if your horse suddenly thinks it's the perfect time to take a nap, you're both going down. And when you go down in armor, it's not graceful, it's more like falling off a building onto a pile of bricks. You'll hit the dirt with such force that you'll feel like you've just been introduced to gravity's full force for the first time. The crowd might cheer, but that's mostly because they're trying to forget you didn't just die. But hey, even if you fall off the horse, there's still hope, sort of. You'll get up, hopefully not too bruised, and you can still try to look dignified while doing it. Maybe you'll swing your sword in the air like you meant to fall, as if that was part of the whole strategy. You're trying to act tough while your back is sore and your pride is in about 500 pieces scattered across the field. But the crowd loves it. Maybe it's because you're the underdog, or maybe it's because you're the first knight they've seen who could actually fall off a horse without dying instantly. Let's say you somehow survive the joust and even win. You've got a victory under your belt. But what's next? Do you get a fancy title, a chest of gold, and a parade? Maybe, but first, You've got to face the brutal reality. You're still a knight in the making, and winning this tournament doesn't automatically mean you've got it all figured out. The first thing you'll notice is how tired you are. Jousting takes everything out of you, and you'll be exhausted. Plus, your armor is heavy. You feel like you've just done a full body workout, but only with the added bonus of a near-death experience. Your back aches, your legs are sore, and every movement feels like it's you into the ground. And don't even get me started on your poor horse, which looks like it might be ready to retire after that one run. You'll pat its sweaty neck and thank it for not throwing you into a pit of despair. This time, the worst part, though, is the glory. Sure, there's some applause, and you might even get a few cheers for your heroic effort. But let's be honest, it's not like anyone's going to remember the name of the knight who won that joust. Maybe you'll be talked about for a day or two, and then you'll be back to scrubbing armor and carrying swords like the rest of the squires. You've achieved your goal, survival, but it's not the kind of win that's going to land you a spot in the royal court. Not yet. For now, you're just another knight trying to prove you've got what it takes. We've already seen what it's like to charge into a joust and scrape by with your pride and possibly a broken rib. But now it's time to really step it up. You've been through the tournament, you've got a taste of the thrill, and now it's time to get into the real meat of knighthood. Sieges, long battles, and the harsh, messy reality of war. And of course the inevitable fall from grace that happens to even the greatest knights. So imagine this. You've been summoned to fight in a siege. You know, one of those situations where you've got to surround a castle and basically figure out how to smash your way in, either by climbing up a big wooden tower or maybe tossing some flaming rocks at the walls until they give in. Simple, right? First, let's talk about the tension. The air is thick with the scent of sweat, wet wood, and the occasional whiff of something burning, hopefully not you. You've got your armor on, but now you're looking at a massive fortress with high stone walls that seem to laugh at you from a distance. You know your job is probably going to involve a lot of waiting, which as a knight is a great way to catch up on your thoughts or dread your impending doom. So you've gathered your siege weapons. There are battering rams, which are basically large wooden logs meant to smash through a gate like some kind of medieval wrecking ball. And of course there's the trebuchet, the giant slingshot that can launch flaming projectiles across vast distances, probably straight into the enemy's food supply or their pride. You're standing there, feeling like an absolute warrior, and then the horn sounds. You're supposed to charge, get to your position, and hope you survive the enemy archers raining arrows down on you. You've got a shield, but it's not like that's going to save you from getting hit in the face by a flaming rock. The worst part, when the siege doesn't go as planned, you'll start battering down that gate, hammering it with everything you've got, and suddenly the enemy archers unleash a hailstorm of arrows. The moment those arrows start flying, you realize that standing behind a wooden shield is like bringing a paper fan to a gunfight. You duck, you cover, and hope like hell that you're not next. And then comes the climbing wall. If your battering ram didn't work, now you're left with the absurdly dangerous job of climbing up a ladder against all odds, and praying the enemy doesn't decide to throw things at you like rocks, boiling oil, or possibly a few insults. You climb with all your might, but all that armor, you're basically trying to climb a wall while carrying a small car. Halfway up, you realize you might just prefer being anywhere else. But by the time you get to the top, you're either victorious or falling straight back down to an epic failure that'll be talked about for centuries. Either way, it's probably the worst thing to happen in your knightly career. Battles aren't like tournaments. No, they're way messier. No one cares if you've got a shiny helmet or fancy sword. The only thing that matters is if you can stay alive long enough to keep fighting. And the key to staying alive: don't stand in the front row. You think you're going to charge in, looking like the knight you've dreamed of. That's cute. Most knights are smart enough to avoid the front lines unless they're really hoping to get a new scar. Your first real battle, it's chaos. Complete, utter chaos. Horses are galloping everywhere, people are yelling, swords are clashing, and there's a good chance that you're lost. As a knight, you're supposed to be brave, charging into battle like a hero, but there's one small problem. You're not exactly sure where the enemy is anymore. You're surrounded by a mess of people all wearing identical armor, so you can't tell whether you're attacking the enemy or accidentally taking down your own side. At one point, you might even get knocked off your horse again and spend the next few minutes crawling through the mud, hoping to not get trampled by the actual warriors. And then there's the moment of terror when a battle goes wrong. You've been fighting for hours, and your sword's starting to feel heavier than usual. You look around, and there it is, the enemy general charging right at you. You've heard of this guy. He's got a reputation for being ruthless and unstoppable. You thought you'd be facing a few random soldiers, but now it's personal, and it feels like you might be facing your own inevitable doom. But wait, what happens next is nothing short of heroic. You take a deep breath and decide to charge in headfirst, sword raised, praying you'll either make a legendary strike or at least be remembered as someone who tried. And at that exact moment, your horse decides it's time to eat grass. Yes, you're now standing there unprepared, with the enemy general charging at you. But miraculously, you manage to dodge the strike and roll out of the way looking like you meant to do that. Your heart is still racing, and the battle rages on, but somehow you survive another day. But let's be real, no night lasts forever. Eventually your glory days will fade, your body will wear down, and the heavy armor that once made you feel invincible will start to feel like a cruel joke. If you haven't been mortally wounded in battle, you'll be facing the much less glamorous reality of old. Your armor won't fit anymore, your sword feels too heavy, and your once pristine jousting skills are starting to resemble a clumsy shuffle. The young squires you once mocked are now the ones who are actually good at fighting, and you're stuck in the back, offering advice like an old man at the pub. At some point you'll have to face the truth. The war is over. The king has moved on, your lands are being taken over, and your legacy, well, let's just say it's probably going to be a chapter in some dusty book that no one reads. But don't worry, just because you're no longer the hero doesn't mean you can't still sit back and enjoy a good feast. Sure, you might be missing a leg, but you've still got your stories to tell, and you can always challenge the younger knights to a drinking contest. After all, you've still got one thing they don't experience. Albert Einstein's life is full of fascinating stories, from his early struggles to his later contributions that revolutionized the world. Let's start with his childhood and move through the key events, throwing in some humor along the way to keep things engaging. Albert Einstein didn't exactly start life as the guy who changed physics forever. In fact, he was a bit of a weird child, which, let's face it, is often the first sign that someone's about to do something truly mind-blowing. Born on March 14, 1879 in Ulm, Germany, young Albert didn't exactly show signs of genius right away. If anything, his early years were full of weird quirks that would make most parents scratch their heads. For one thing, baby Einstein was not a chatterbox. In fact, his speech was delayed, and his parents worried that he might not be as bright as they hoped. Who would have thought that this silent little kid, who might have been mistaken for someone trying to start a new trend of thinking before speaking, was the one who would eventually redefine the laws of physics? Imagine the relief his parents must have felt when, at age 3, he finally said his first words. This is gonna be a weird journey. But it wasn't just speech that Einstein struggled with. He had a tough time in school, too. He didn't exactly fit the mold of the dutiful student. While he was bored by rote memorization, he was fascinated by the big questions like, how does the universe work? Instead of paying attention in class, Einstein would daydream about the mysteries of the cosmos and think, what if the speed of light is constant? Wait, no one's ever asked that, maybe I'll do that later. You know, classic child behavior. By the time Einstein was a teenager, he had already started developing his rebellious genius streak. In high school, he was definitely the kid who sat in the back of the classroom, tuning out the boring stuff while secretly developing his theories on math and physics. Teachers and classmates probably just thought he was a lazy, daydreaming troublemaker, but little did they know he was on his way to break the laws of nature itself. There's a famous story about how Einstein, when he was a teenager, was gifted a geometry book. While most kids would look at that and think, well, that's nice, but where's the comic book? Einstein was all like, hold on, this book is about space and geometry. This could change everything. And it did. That one geometry book helped him understand non-Euclidean geometry, which would come in handy later on when he developed his theory of general relativity. Einstein's path to success wasn't exactly a smooth ride, though. After failing to get into a prestigious school in Germany, he had to enroll in a Swiss school, where he was still the awkward, rebellious genius who was bad at following the rules. He did, however, manage to graduate and earned his degree from the Swiss Federal Polytechnic in Zurich. But even after his graduation, Einstein had trouble finding a job. For someone who would later become the most famous physicist in the world, this must have been pretty humbling. It's almost like if you were a rock star and couldn't get your first gig because they told you, sorry, your music's a bit too out there for us. He ended up working at the Swiss Patent Office, where he spent his days examining patent applications for stuff like invention designs, a job that had absolutely nothing to do with changing the universe. But even while working this dull job, Einstein was constantly thinking about theoretical physics in his spare time. In fact, some of his most revolutionary ideas were developed while working at the patent office, where he had time to reflect on concepts like special relativity. Imagine, instead of being stuck in a lab, Einstein spent his days surrounded by a bunch of boring patent applications, while his mind was probably thinking, what if I told everyone time isn't as constant as they think? Einstein's breakthrough came in 1905 when he published a paper called On the Electrodynamics of Moving Bodies. Sounds intense, right? This paper introduced his special theory of relativity and basically told everyone, hey, time and space, not as constant as you think. And just like that, the world of physics was flipped upside down. But let's break it down. Before Einstein, people thought that time was this fixed, unchangeable thing. You knew exactly how long an hour was, how long a second was. But Einstein came along and said, no, time's actually pretty flexible, depending on how fast you're moving. So if you were traveling near the speed of light, time would slow down for you. Imagine how many people's minds exploded when they heard that. It's like he took the fabric of reality, gave it a good shake and said, everything you know, it's actually weirder than you'd. And just like that, Einstein became a household name. He went from a guy working at a patent office to someone whose name would become synonymous with genius. He could probably never step into a room without someone asking him about the nature of reality or his wild hair. Because seriously, who could ignore that hair? After publishing his series of groundbreaking papers in 1905, what historians now call his miracle year, Einstein didn't just become known in academic circles. No, his theories were so mind-bending, so utterly outrageous, that people outside the physics bubble started to notice. And in case you're wondering, the world wasn't quite ready for a man to stroll in and declare time and space. I bent them, you're welcome. But by the time Einstein published his general theory of relativity in 1915, he had officially gone from that patent office guy with a physics hobby to international science wizard. General relativity was the real kicker. It suggested that mass bends space and time like how a bowling ball sitting on a trampoline pulls the fabric down around it. And if that sounds confusing, well, it was. Einstein was now the guy who'd basically told the universe, gravity? It's not a force, it's geometry. But here's the catch. Nobody believed him at first. It sounded too weird, too magical, too much like a late-night thought after too many espressos. Einstein's theory needed proof, and proof arrived in 1919 during a solar eclipse. British astronomer Sir Arthur Eddington took photos of starlight bending around the sun, just like Einstein predicted. Suddenly, the headline was everywhere. Lights bends. Einstein was right. Reality is broken. Send help. Okay, that's not exactly what the paper said, but close enough. Overnight, Einstein became a global superstar. Think rock star level famous, but instead of guitar solos, he dropped relativity equations. He was mobbed by reporters, cheered by academics, and politely stared at by people who definitely had no idea what he was talking about. You could argue he was the first true science celebrity, long before we had documentaries or podcasts explaining black holes with jazz music in the background. As it turns out, being a genius comes with baggage. And we're not just talking about suitcases full of lecture notes and frizzy hair products. Einstein, now a professor and a public figure, was constantly being asked to speak right, and worst of all, pose for photos. He despised all the attention, saying fame made him feel like an exotic animal in a zoo. And if you've ever seen a photo of Einstein sticking out his tongue, that wasn't him trying to be funny, that was him going, I am so done with this nonsense. But even while fame was nipping at his heels, Einstein kept working. He shifted from revolutionizing physics to redefining his role as a public intellectual. He spoke out on pacifism, human rights, and anti-Semitism, all topics close to his heart. And despite being hailed as the smartest man alive, he wasn't afraid to challenge society, governments, or even other scientists who said, "Slow down, Albert, our brains can't take this." One of the funniest things about Einstein's fame, people constantly tried to ask him normal questions, hoping for genius-level wisdom, and he'd give them beautifully weird answers. Like when asked to explain relativity in simple terms, he allegedly said, "When you sit with a pretty girl for 2 hours, it feels like a minute. But when you sit on a hot stove for a minute, it feels like 2 hours. That's relativity." Which is both hilarious and profoundly accurate. By the 1920s and 30s, a new gang of physicists started taking over the scientific world. Their thing, quantum mechanics. Think particles popping in and out of existence, behaving like waves, teleporting, and generally being way too unpredictable to make sense. Einstein wasn't having it. He respected the work, sure. He even helped lay the foundations of quantum theory. But the moment someone said there's no certainty in the universe, Einstein clapped back with one of his most famous quotes, "God does not play dice with the universe," to which fellow physicist Niels Bohr replied, in possibly the sassiest comeback in scientific history, "Stop telling God what to do." It was the intellectual equivalent of a rap battle, but with equations instead of rhymes. Einstein kept pushing for a deeper, more orderly explanation of the universe, a so-called unified field theory that could stitch together the madness of quantum mechanics with the logic of relativity. He never quite cracked it, but the attempt defined his later years. One man trying to organize a universe that refused to behave. As the 1930s rolled in, things in Germany were getting, let's say, historically unpleasant. With Adolf Hitler's rise to power, things got extremely dangerous for Jewish scientists. Einstein, being both Jewish and a famous scientist, was suddenly a two-strike target. He was in the UN when Hitler came to power, giving lectures and probably thinking, Finally, people are listening and no one's burning my books. But once Hitler took control, Einstein knew it was no longer safe to return to Germany. So he did what any genius would do in a crisis. He permanently relocated to America, gave up his German citizenship again. He'd already ditched it once as a teenager, and accepted a position at the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, New Jersey. It was a quiet little place where he could finally think, work, and avoid being shot by fascists. A win-win. But Einstein wasn't just hiding out in Princeton pondering cosmic riddles. He was also very publicly denouncing the Nazis, speaking out for human rights, and becoming one of the most respected moral voices of his time. While others kept quiet, Einstein called it like he saw it. Whether it was racism in America or fascism in Europe, he wasn't afraid to say, hey, maybe stop being the worst. Now here's where the story takes a darker, more complicated turn. In 1939, Einstein was approached by fellow physicist Leo Szilard, who said, so there's a chance Nazi Germany might build a nuclear bomb. Szilard knew Einstein's name carried weight. If he warned the US government, maybe they'd listen. So together they drafted a letter to President Franklin D. Roosevelt, explaining that splitting atoms could unleash devastating power, and maybe America should get on that before Germany does. Einstein signed the letter, the government listened, and just like that, the Manhattan Project was born. But here's the thing, Einstein had no part in building the bomb. He wasn't even invited. His politics and pacifism made people nervous. He just unknowingly helped kickstart the whole thing with that one terrifying letter. When the atomic bombs were finally dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945, Einstein was horrified. He later said, had I known that the Germans would not succeed in developing an atomic bomb, I would not have lifted a finger. It haunted him for the rest of his life, that he, a man devoted to peace, had unintentionally helped usher in the nuclear age. He spent his later years campaigning for nuclear disarmament, basically telling the world, oops, sorry, maybe don't do that again. Einstein's final decades were spent in Princeton, where he lived a quiet, peculiar life that slowly turned him into a global symbol of eccentric genius. He rarely wore socks because he said they always got holes anyway, and he'd walk around town with his hair sticking out like a lightning-struck mop. Children loved him, tourists adored him, and students didn't always understand him. Because while Einstein kept giving lectures, his ideas were getting more abstract by the year. By the 1950s, he was chasing a unified theory of everything, a beautiful idea that he never quite nailed down, but he couldn't let go of it. He'd scribble formulas on notepads, backs of envelopes, napkins, basically anything short of the neighbor's cat. He'd also take long walks through Princeton with friends or alone, lost in thought, possibly recalculating the geometry of the universe or trying to remember if he left the kettle on. When he wasn't doing theoretical physics, he was, well, doing more theoretical physics. But he also played the violin, answered letters from children, and generally acted like a cross between Yoda and your very confused, very lovable great-uncle, who might accidentally invent teleportation before breakfast. On April 17, 1955, Albert Einstein suffered an abdominal aneurysm. He was rushed to the hospital, but even then he refused surgery. He said, I want to go when I want. It is tasteless to prolong life artificially. His mind, even in those final hours, was still racing. He was reportedly scribbling equations on a notepad beside his hospital bed, as if even then he thought he might finally crack the cosmic puzzle that had haunted him all his life. Einstein passed away in the early morning hours of April 18, 1955, at the age of 76. But here's where it gets weird again. The pathologist who performed his autopsy, Dr. Thomas Stoltz Harvey, removed Einstein's brain without permission. Not maliciously, he claimed it was for science. For decades, Bits of Einstein's brain were stored in jars, studied, sliced, photographed, and even mailed to researchers around the world. Somewhere in Kansas, a chunk of it reportedly lived in a cookie jar for a while. Because apparently if you're the greatest physicist who ever lived, your brain gets passed around like collectible Pokemon cards. Einstein became more than just a man. He became a mythic figure, a symbol of genius, curiosity, rebellion, and the kind of mind that only comes along once in 1,000 years. He was flawed, awkward, messy, stubborn, but also brilliant, humble, and deeply human. He didn't just change physics, he changed the way we understand reality, space, time, light, gravity. He pulled back the curtain and showed us that the universe isn't just bizarre, it's beautifully bizarre. And now, he's on t-shirts, mugs, memes. He's quoted by Instagram philosophers and misunderstood in motivational posters. But somewhere, deep in the weirdness of quantum fields and curved space-time, Einstein lives on, not just as a man who asked questions, but as one who reminded us that wonder is the beginning of wisdom.